On June 5, 1976, in Union, Kentucky, Dr. Gaines Huey, a dentist from Walton, left for work as usual. Driving down Chambers Road, something caught his eye. A lifeless body of a teenage girl by the roadside, next to a culvert. Kentucky State Police were called. At around 7:15 a.m., Trooper Jan Wushner and his team from the Walton State Police Department reached the scene. The victim's body had numerous cuts and bruises, but the biggest injury was to the head. The detectives also discovered deep strangulation marks around the neck. They examined the crime scene, discovering broken twigs and flattened grass. It was clear the body was dragged here. There was no blood splatter on the crime scene. The crime happened somewhere else. This was just the dumping ground. The culprit did not bother to hide the body at all. It was left in plain sight, as if he wanted it to be found. Investigators combed the area, but they could not find the lethal weapon, fingerprints, or any other clues. With no witnesses or concrete evidence, Detective Wushner had no leads to follow. With the crime scene investigation yielding no results, investigators turned to the victim's body for answers. Her body was sent to the county's medical examiner's lab for an autopsy. The results of the autopsy revealed she had suffered a vicious assault. A tire iron was used as a weapon with extreme force. Disfigured by extensive bruising and swelling, the victim's face was nearly unrecognizable. A deep laceration on her head was evident. The signs of genital abuse and brutal physical trauma were clear. The cause was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation by manual strangulation. When all hope was lost, the forensic team made a breakthrough. They discovered foreign DNA on the victim's clothing. But when they ran the DNA sample through the central database, no match was found. With no further leads, the case file started gathering dust and went cold. The girl whose life was ended so brutally was just 16 years old. She was identified as Cathy Sue Klaber. Cathy Sue Klaber, born and raised in Boone County, Kentucky, came into this world in 1960. She attended Dixie Heights High School, where she was a senior. Cathy Sue was known not just as a good student, but for her passion for music. She played the piano and violin. She was deeply involved in the school's band, which became a significant part of her life. Carol was more than just a student and a musician. She was also a loving sister. She had a close relationship with her brothers Charles and Thomas Klaber. Cathy Sue was only 10 when her father passed away due to heart failure. Cathy Sue led a very normal life in a quiet town, but what truly set Cathy Sue apart were her frequent visits to DeVal Park in western Covington, Kentucky. In an era when communication relied on face-to-face interactions, DeVal Park was her sanctuary, her place to unwind, her hub for socializing. Here, she enjoyed riding her bike and engaging in heart-to-heart conversations with friends. Carol's charismatic and outgoing nature made her a popular figure among her friends whom she met at DeVal Park. At around 5:30 p.m. on June 4th, she took a bike ride to the park. The plan was to meet friends for dinner at Z's Hyde Park restaurant. But rather than spending time with her friends, witnesses at the park observed her talking to a stranger. He was approximately 5 foot 10 inches with a slender build and sandy blonde shoulder-length hair. He drove an impressive Pontiac Grand Prix or a Chevy Monte Carlo. They both left the park together. She was seen putting her bicycle into the trunk of the man's car. The man then drove her to her home, where her neighbors saw her taking the bicycle out of the car. She went inside, but the car did not leave right away. It stood there idling in the driveway. A few minutes later, Carol Sue came back out with a change of clothes and left with this same man. This was the last time she was seen alive. When her family reported her missing, the police informed them of a body they had discovered, bearing a striking resemblance to Carol Sue. Her brother Thomas bravely stepped into the morgue to confirm the unimaginable truth. It was indeed Carol Sue. As days turned into years, the case of Carol Sue remained unsolved and eventually went cold. With each passing moment, her family and friends could only yearn for the answers and closure that remained agonizingly out of reach. After years of silence, a glimmer of hope appeared in Carol Sue's execution. In 2017, two cold case detectives, Coy Cox and Tina Adams, reopened the case. They teamed up with the original detective, Jerry Keith, who has since retired but was an expert on the Carol Sue case. Together, this trio began to revisit the case file page by page, looking for clues with a new perspective. Cox and Adams began their search, re-examining two suspects Keith had previously identified. The first lead was of a man with a history of car theft, matching the description of Carol's last seen vehicle. They tracked him down and questioned him. Despite his criminal past, the man was surprisingly cooperative. He did not hide behind a lawyer, but he vehemently denied any role in Carol's slaying. He understood his prior wrongdoings made him a suspect, but he stood firm on his innocence in Carol's incident. Cox and Adams asked for a DNA test, and he willingly provided the sample. After a long wait, the results came back in December 2018. The foreign DNA found on the girl's clothing did not match his DNA. He was not the perpetrator. With their initial suspect eliminated, Cox and Adams shifted their focus to the second suspect in 2020. Their attention honed in on an unknown assailant who had committed a similar crime in the same vicinity just 2 years after Carol's body was discovered on the 1st of October 1978. The only difference is the victim is still alive. The investigators reached out to the victim of the October 1st, 1978 crime. She recounted the chilling events of that fateful night. It was a dark and quiet evening in Park Hills, Kentucky, when she was ambushed in her garage. A man appeared out of nowhere, suddenly grabbing her from behind. What followed was a traumatic ordeal that stretched for 2 agonizing hours. She was tortured and brutally assaulted. First, he had his way with her. Then, the attacker burnt her with a cigarette and relentlessly hit her to keep her subdued. Cox meticulously combed through the archives, carefully reconstructing the evidence. His efforts paid off when he uncovered a critical fingerprint on the victim's car. They ran the fingerprints through their system and, to their surprise, found a match. The attacker was Michael Dean Tate. He was now 77 years old. With this discovery, Michael Dean Tate was arrested for similarly assaulting a woman in 1978. Also, Cox and Adams were now breathing down his neck as a potential suspect in the Carol Sue case. Tate was a frequent traveler to Kentucky for work during the 70s and 80s. He had a questionable past, but he too adamantly refused any involvement in the slaying. Detectives were confident that they had finally found the man responsible, but their optimism fell to pieces as the DNA found on Carol did not match Tate's. Also, court records firmly placed Tate in Cincinnati in 1976, leaving the detectives once again at square one. This decades-old mystery continued to slip through their grasp. In September 2022, Detectives Cox and Adams sought help from Othram Labs, a private company with a unique knack for solving the unsolvable. Othram Labs helps police figure out how people are related to each other, even if they are not very closely related. They do this by using special tests on DNA, which look at short tandem repeats, which are like little patterns in the DNA, and single nucleotide polymorphisms, which are tiny changes in the DNA. Using their expertise, the police can determine who the assailant might be related to by using DNA. This task was given to Othram Labs in September 2022. After securing funding, it took less than 2 months. By November 2022, Othram Labs came back with the results. Through the DNA samples left by the perpetrator, a genetic link was identified. He is Thomas Dunaway. The catch was, Thomas Dunaway had already passed away in 1990. This means the police could not test his DNA for a direct match. But he had a child who grew up never knowing his father. This discovery would become the key to unlocking the mystery. Detectives traveled to meet Mr. Dunaway's biological son to collect DNA samples for comparison. When the DNA of Dunaway's son was compared with foreign DNA found 46 years ago in Carol Sue's clothing, the lab came out with an astonishing result. In December 2022, almost 46 years after the crime, justice would finally be served for Carol Sue Klaber and her family. The DNA results proved with 100% certainty that the man they were looking for was indeed Thomas W. Dunaway. Thomas W. Dunaway was 19 years old when he ended the life of Carol Sue. He managed to evade justice for decades, but the tireless efforts of the police eventually caught up to him. Now that they had a name, detectives could delve deep into his past life and the crimes he committed. They found more evidence that he lived near DeVal Park. This was where Carol Sue was last seen with a man resembling Dunaway. As they delved deeper, they found more incriminating evidence. Thomas W. Dunaway was not just a one-time offender. He went on a 6-month crime spree, committing crimes and ditching the cars he used. His criminal streak did not stop after the demise of Carol Sue Klaber. He was also convicted of taking the life of another person in Boone County just 6 months after Carol Sue's tragic end. On a December night in 1976, 19-year-old Ronald Townsend was found lying on the ground, riddled with bullets. He was severely injured and taken to the hospital. 4 days later, he succumbed to his injuries, leaving behind a grieving family. Dunaway had a pattern of committing crimes and abandoning the cars he used to flee the scenes. His love for cars led detectives to his doorstep. In May 1976, Dunaway bought a two-tone 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo. It was the same car in which he picked up Carol Sue at the park. After Carol Sue's slaying, he exchanged it for an orange Chevrolet Vega. He left Union, Kentucky and took refuge in Fort Carson. This car swap enabled him to shield himself from Carol Sue's case. But when he shot Ronald Townsend, it was the orange Vega he was driving. Nobody saw who the shooter was, but many witnesses saw the orange Vega he drove off in. The detective issued an attempt to locate for his very prominent orange Vega. This chase culminated in his arrest on Christmas Eve in 1976 in South Carolina, where he faced charges of setting someone else's car on fire and possessing an illegal firearm. He confessed and pled guilty, receiving a life sentence. Unfortunately, his sentence was cut short, and Dunaway was released early on parole in 1984 after serving only 7.5 years behind bars. The gruesome slayings of Carol Sue and Ronald Townsend had disturbing similarities. Both victims were blatantly left in plain sight near the road, almost as if it were a taunt directed at the authorities. It was as if the assailant wanted to send a message. In both cases, nobody saw the actual man responsible, but many saw his flashy car. A deeper investigation revealed that Dunaway was not just a person of interest for the police, but someone else was also looking for him: the United States Army. Interestingly, Dunaway enlisted in the Army just 9 days after he took Carol Sue's life. He was initially stationed at Fort Knox, but then transferred to Fort Carson, Colorado. Thomas Dunaway served the Army for just 6 months and went AWOL after he took the life of Townsend. The connection between Carol Sue Klaber and Thomas Dunaway remains a mystery. All detectives had were theories. There was no concrete evidence as to how they both knew each other. There was a possibility that they were childhood friends or schoolmates in the Erlanger-Ellesmere Schools District, as they both attended the same schools. But if that would have been the case, someone would have identified Dunaway at the park. Detective Cox believes that DeVoe Park holds a crucial clue. Carol was known for her social nature, and it is possible she met Dunaway there for the first time. Maybe she went on her first date with Dunaway that evening. Detectives had concrete DNA evidence against Dunaway, which would have been enough to charge him with the execution of Carol Sue had he still been alive. Yet still, Detective Cox obtained a court order to exhume the body of Dunaway, which was buried in 1990. Not only did this allow for a direct DNA sample to be collected for the Carol Sue case, but more importantly, it would be entered into the combined DNA index system that could link his DNA to other unsolved crimes. Although justice may not have been fully served, the revelation of Dunaway's identity brought some closure to the case. Dunaway's history, his criminal activities, and his release from prison in 1984 raise valid concerns about the true extent of justice served. While there is a degree of closure, it accentuates the complex nature of the criminal justice system. In 1979, an unidentified woman's body was found in a state park, her case unsolved for decades. It was not until 2023 that significant developments, including advances in forensic technology and cross-state collaboration, shed new light on the long-standing mystery, and the person who attacked her was brought to justice. It was September 28, 1979. A woman's body was discovered at Sugar Pine Point State Park campground on Lake Tahoe. She appeared badly beaten and bruised and appeared to have been strangled. In her early 30s, she had some jewelry on her body. She had some rings, a wristwatch, and a deer pendant. The 3 people who discovered her body did not immediately call the police. Instead, they called a local newspaper and snuck off. The reporter then informed law enforcement authorities. Police found that the 3 men had not called their discovery in because they had warrants out for arrest. They were all cleared for this specific crime. An autopsy, shockingly, would reveal that the Jane Doe was likely alive when they discovered her. It appeared that she had been assaulted, and so an SA kit test was conducted on her body. These kits have collection bags, microscopic slides, a comb, sterile containers, etc. to collect evidence. Hairs, saliva, blood, and other bodily fluids are lifted off victims with the help of these kits to prove assault and identify the perpetrator. She was found to have suffered severe blows to her body, and there were defensive wounds that indicated she fought back. There were multiple signs of struggle around the picnic area of the western shore of the lake, and the victim lost one of her flip-flops while trying to escape her assailant. Investigating officers recovered very little evidence, but unknowingly bagged one important item: an empty beer bottle they found near the body. Back in 1979, forensic technology was not as advanced as it is today. The evidence was filed away, and the body was stored in the morgue for a long, long time. Nobody came forward to claim the unknown woman, and so it was decided to bury her in an anonymous grave in a potter's field located in El Dorado County. Lake Tahoe has always been a popular tourist destination, and was so back then as well. The beaches and campsites always attract people from all over, and it was hard to trace this woman. She could be from anywhere. At the time, police did not recover a vehicle or any other belongings, so there was no way of knowing who she was and how she got there. Limited by technology, it was considered a cold case and was taken off priority. Years later, when DNA testing came out in 1986, the DNA lifted off the beer bottle and the victim were analyzed. It was clear the bottle belonged to the assailant, but there was no further progress until decades later. Almost 36 years later, investigating officer John Gaines took over this case in 2014. He reopened the Lake Tahoe Jane Doe's files. It was a part of the El Dorado County's Cold Case Unit, opening cases from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. In the Lake Tahoe Jane Doe case, he exhumed the body. Accompanied by a forensic anthropologist from California State University, Chico, he printed photos of her jewelry to be released to the public in an attempt to identify her. The pictures were published in local newspapers without many leads. Gaines noticed the necklace and realized the deer necklace was actually a high pendant, which represents the Jewish symbol for life. He said it was the kind of pendant Elvis Presley used to wear on stage. With the high pendant as a lead, Gaines tried his luck with the local Jewish community. Lake Tahoe's local rabbi, Rabbi Morty Rickler, who had opened a Chabad, was surprised to have officers contact him. A Chabad is considered a Jewish community center, and one does not often come across police in these centers. It is a holy place of peace and sanctity. When they explained the case, Rabbi Rickler was happy to help and spread the word in the community. In 1979, when the body was discovered, the Jewish community was just settling in the Lake Tahoe area, with very few families. Now the area had 2 synagogues and over 1,000 Jewish members. In September 2015, Rabbi Yossi Grossbaum had a visit from 3 detectives, in plain clothes but with guns and badges. Gaines had reached the city of Folsom, California, in an attempt to connect with any surviving relatives of the victim. Rabbi Grossbaum spread the word in Northern California and throughout the state. One family finally came forward after identifying the pendant in the newspapers. A DNA test was conducted on the remains and the alleged victim's daughter, and there was a match. The body was then finally identified as Patricia Carnahan, who would have been 35 years old at the time that she lost her life. Originally from Virginia, Patricia had gone off on a solo road trip around California. She was driving a red Volkswagen bus. She had contacted her family to tell them she was on her way back home, but never arrived. A month later, in October of 1979, the family reported her missing. Her car was recovered from a dealership in Venice, California. Apparently, someone had abandoned the car in the lot. Unfortunately, she was a missing persons case in Virginia, so no connection was made. Additionally, Patricia's DNA profile was uploaded into CODIS, FBI's combined DNA system. as well as the DNA from the perpetrator, but for many more years there was no match. Her body was then handed over to the family for a proper burial, and she was laid to rest 26 years after her unfortunate demise. The perpetrator, however, remained free. Years later, a completely unrelated chain of events led to the arrest of the assailant. In 2023, the state of Washington provided funding to the Washington State SA Kit Initiative, a movement aimed at reopening abuse probe tests from the 70s onwards, in an attempt to put the perpetrators behind bars. The Spokane Police Department was one of the few that had officers assigned to work full-time on abuse probe test cases. The SPD had over 1,500 kits, and among those, over 250 kits got matches on the combined DNA index system. This led to a huge breakthrough. In 1994, a man had been accused of having his way with a homeless woman in Spokane. She reported the incident to the police, got tested for verification of her accusation, and identified her assailant as a man named Harold Carpenter. He was booked on second-degree charges for forcing her against her will, but never prosecuted because the woman did not press charges. Harold Carpenter claimed that they had consensual relations and he did not defile her, so it was just his word against hers. The test kit had been filed away, but was now uploaded into CODIS. The woman who had logged the complaint had long since passed away. But the DNA on the system matched the DNA on the empty beer bottles and Patricia Carnahan's body. Further investigation placed Carpenter in the vicinity of the crime on September 29, 1979, when he was arrested in Susanville, California for driving under the influence. Carpenter had various misdemeanor arrests between 1990 and 1993, as well as being charged for another non-consensual incident regarding a woman in 1994. He was married and lived in Sandpoint until his divorce in 1998, after she filed charges against him for domestic battery. There were charges against him from 1998 to 2018 in Bonner County for possession of illegal substances, reckless driving, more DUI, and disturbing the peace. There was not much on his record in Washington except one DUI in the year 2000. Carpenter was living on Spokane streets since 2016, rendered homeless. In 2018, he was arrested as a suspect in another non-consensual case in Spokane County, but it was not proven. He was quoted in an article published in the Inlander in 2020 regarding his homeless situation. "You just tough it. You just go outside and you try to get out of the rain or the snow or whatever." In 2022, he was a suspect for a groping incident, but again, he was not arrested. He moved into Park Tower Apartments in downtown Spokane. Investigators of El Dorado County now had probable cause to arrest him, and Spokane Police Department helped in locating Carpenter. Thanks to multi-state agencies working together, the 63-year-old was brought to justice when he was arrested on March 1, 2023, for taking the life of Patricia Carnahan. Due to the statute of limitations, the Spokane case could not be pursued, and there were no charges filed against him in that particular case. He is currently held without bond in Spokane County Jail, awaiting extradition process for El Dorado so he can be prosecuted for his crimes. The decades-long cold case was finally cracked. Patricia Carnahan's assailant has been identified 44 years later, thanks to advances in forensic technology and agencies working together across states. The mystery of the 1979 Lake Tahoe Jane Doe solved almost half a century later. Natasha Alex Carter was born on December 22, 1989, to mother Susan Gale Carter. Known to her loved ones by her middle name, Alex, her life was marked by a complex family history that would be tragically altered on August 8, 2000, when she mysteriously vanished alongside her 41-year-old mother, Susan. Born into a world marked by impending turmoil and uncertainty, Natasha's formative years were overshadowed by the tumultuous custody battle between her parents, Ricky Lafferty and Susan Gale Carter. The couple's relationship was marred by discord, exacerbated by Susan's bipolar diagnosis, for which she declined medication. However, the relationship reached its breaking point when Susan was found in the company of other men, eventually establishing a romantic connection with the couple's landlord, Larry Dell Webb. In 1998, Susan and Larry decided to get married, and thanks to Larry's influential connections, Susan managed to secure custody of Natasha, despite her ongoing mental health challenges. What followed was a contentious and heated legal dispute between Susan and Ricky over the custody of their daughter, Natasha. The custody battle took a darker turn when, during a mediation meeting, Susan allegedly made ominous threats to Ricky Lafferty, promising that he would never see Natasha again. Susan failed to appear for the next hearing, and custody was granted to Ricky. On August 8, 2000, the course of Susan and Natasha's lives took an inexplicable turn when they vanished without leaving a trace. Natasha, who was a mere 10 years old at the time, had not been in contact with her father Ricky for several months leading up to her disappearance. When Ricky grew increasingly concerned and decided to reach out to Larry, Susan's new husband, to inquire about his daughter's whereabouts, he was met with a perplexing response. Larry, in his initial response, claimed that Susan and Natasha had left in the company of a man named Jose, with the assurance that they would return shortly. However, just a few days later, Ricky made another anxious call to Larry, only to be told a different story. This time, Larry stated that Susan and Natasha had left with a man named Manuel. The ever-changing names of the individuals added another layer of confusion to the mystery. Given Susan's remarks about making sure Ricky never sees his daughter again, investigators suspected that Susan had kidnapped Natasha herself. This suspicion was validated by Natasha's grandmother, who believed that she was afraid of her mother and did not want to live with her. In the wake of their disappearance, a felony warrant was issued for Susan Gale Carter on November 13, 2000. Charging her with the kidnapping. The initial narrative categorized Natasha as the victim of a family abduction, speculating that she might be in the company of her mother and an adult male. There were also concerns that they might have crossed state lines, compounding the challenge of locating them. Over the years, the case has remained shrouded in mystery, with no concrete leads or significant breakthroughs. Natasha's father, Ricky Lafferty, continued to hold on to hope that he would one day be reunited with his daughter. Despite the passage of 2 decades, the case was far from being forgotten or deemed unsolvable. Though the case received very little media attention, authorities remained committed to finding answers and ensuring justice for Natasha and her family. In 2021, the FBI elevated the reward offered for vital information that could potentially unveil the whereabouts of either Natasha or her mother Susan. That same year, law enforcement authorities revealed that Susan might also be operating under the alias Susan Gale Carter Webb. But with no progress in the case, investigators began to look at the possibility that what they once believed was a family abduction could have been a case of foul play. Susan Gale Carter, who was the prime suspect in Natasha's disappearance, was no longer the focus of the investigation. West Virginia State Police uncovered new evidence that indicated both Susan and Natasha mysteriously disappeared simultaneously. In a statement, West Virginia State Police said, "This case was originally reported as Susan Carter kidnapping Natasha Carter, but over the course of this investigation, it has been determined that both Susan Carter and Natasha Carter are and have been missing since August 8, 2000. This revelation reshaped the entire narrative surrounding their disappearance. There was an unexpected twist in the case when West Virginia police zeroed in on Larry Del Webb's residence, 100 block of Kyle Lane, where Susan and Natasha were living during the time of their disappearances. In August 2023, the FBI initiated a thorough search of the property with the aim of uncovering evidence related to Natasha and Susan's disappearances. Webb, who is now in his 80s, claimed to suffer from dementia and memory loss. During a press conference held at the time of the FBI's inquiry, Webb appeared bewildered by the sudden intrusion into his home. He claimed to have no understanding as to why the authorities were combing through his property. However, when the name Natasha was mentioned, he did acknowledge some degree of familiarity, and when Susan was brought up, he expressed that he believed they were married. In a rather fragmented recollection, he also mentioned that he was away on a trip when the mother and daughter mysteriously disappeared. The FBI search yielded an unexpected discovery, as reported by Webb's live-in caretaker, Terry Lilly. It was stated that law enforcement found a bullet in the wall of the bedroom, allegedly with Natasha's DNA on it, though that has yet to be confirmed. Authorities also removed tiles from the basement floor. In October 2023, Larry Del Webb was charged with taking Natasha's life in the first degree. This marked a significant breakthrough in the case. It is worth noting that Webb has not been charged in connection with Susan's disappearance, leaving that part of the mystery unresolved. Despite these developments, the fact remains that both Natasha and Susan continue to be missing, leaving an air of uncertainty surrounding their ultimate fate. The investigation remains active, and Webb is awaiting trial. Natalie Cochran, a licensed pharmacist, originally hails from West Virginia, a state known for its stunning natural beauty and tight-knit communities. She carved a place for herself there, living a seemingly ordinary life with her husband, Michael Cochran. Natalie and Michael seemed to be enjoying a life of tranquility, but that peaceful existence was abruptly shattered when Michael suddenly and mysteriously passed away on February 11, 2019. Later that same year, Natalie was thrust into the spotlight due to the unraveling of a Ponzi scheme and mounting allegations that suggested her involvement in her husband's demise might be deeper and more sinister than initially believed. In July 2019, federal prosecutors filed a civil lawsuit against Natalie Cochran, alleging that she and her late husband Michael operated a financial scam. The Cochrans were the owners of two companies, Tactical Solutions Group and Technological Management Studios. They purportedly led investors to believe that Tactical held government contracts to supply semi-automatic weapons to various defense agencies, including the U.S. Department of Defense. These allegations marked the start of a complex legal saga. According to the civil lawsuit, the Cochrans deceived investors by making them believe in the legitimacy of their government contracts. In total, both companies raised at least $2.5 million from 11 investors. Investors were promised significant returns on their investments, but the truth was vastly different. U.S. Attorney Mike Stewart revealed that Tactical did not possess any government contracts for semi-automatic weapons. Instead, the Cochrans allegedly spent investors' money on lavish living, expensive dining, and other personal expenses. Tactical made donations to various local organizations, including Shady Spring Middle School's football department and the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League. They also donated semi-automatic weapons as bingo prizes at a fundraiser held at Shady Spring High School. This fundraiser raised over $32,000, with half of the proceeds going to Shady Spring High Volleyball and the other half to the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League, for which Natalie served as treasurer. Despite the significant donations, questions began to emerge about the legitimacy of the funds. The League board member, James Quesenberry, revealed that Tactical's check for $16,680 bounced, and numerous unauthorized withdrawals were made from the League account. An internal audit was conducted to investigate financial records. As the legal scrutiny intensified, Natalie filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in July. Her bankruptcy filings revealed that she had minimal income and assets. She claimed to have less than $600 in bank accounts and a staggering $1.4 million in liabilities. The allegations against the Cochrans prompted federal and state investigations into their business dealings. It was reported that investors received letters on a U.S. Department of Defense letterhead, assuring them that their returns on investment would be available at a later date. Natalie maintained that much of the information related to the investments was classified and could not be discussed. Natalie claimed in a creditors' meeting that federal agents and West Virginia State Police had frozen her bank accounts, rendering her unable to pay her creditors. On February 11, 2019, Natalie's husband and business partner, Michael Cochran, passed away at Bowers Hospice House 5 days after supposedly hitting his head during a seizure. The circumstances surrounding Michael's end prompted authorities to investigate further. Reports emerged that Michael had been hospitalized multiple times in the months preceding due to an unspecified illness. A government official in Raleigh County disclosed that West Virginia State Police were looking into the case. In a startling development, a judicial order was executed in early September, leading to the exhumation of Michael Cochran's body from Sunset Memorial Gardens. The copy of the judicial order was reportedly sealed, pending the close of both federal and state investigations into the circumstances surrounding his tragic fate. Natalie maintained that her husband's passing was a result of an accidental fall that caused him to hit his head during a seizure. She asserted that Michael was transported to the hospital 20 minutes after his fall, and denied any involvement in what had happened to him. However, there were conflicting reports regarding the timeline of events and the presence of other adults in the house during the critical hours preceding Michael's hospitalization. In November 2021, Natalie found herself facing a first-degree charge for taking the life of her husband. By then, Natalie was already serving an 11-year federal prison sentence related to the Ponzi scheme. which further fueled speculation about her involvement in Michael's end. The proceedings took an unexpected turn during a hearing in a Raleigh County courtroom. Natalie appeared in the courtroom wearing a brown skirt, khaki-colored pants, and shackles on her hands. Members of her family, including her 2 teenage children, were present. In a surprising move, the prosecution decided to drop the charge against Natalie. The reason cited was the need for more time to gather evidence. The prosecution's decision was a strategic one, aimed at allowing for a re-examination of Michael's body. Raleigh County prosecuting attorney Ben Hatfield made the motion to dismiss the charge, stating how vital the re-examining of the body would be to the case. Hatfield further clarified that he had consulted Michael's family before formally requesting the exhumation. The decision to re-exhume the body was not taken lightly, as Hatfield sought an expert's opinion to ensure that the examination would yield viable scientific evidence. Hatfield's request was rooted in the need for a specialized test that could detect insulin levels in tissue samples. This test had not been conducted during the initial autopsy, which took place when Michael's body was first exhumed in September 2019. The absence of this specific test left room for uncertainty. According to Hatfield, it was extremely likely that he would re-indict Natalie for the slaying of her husband once the examination was complete. Natalie's defense attorneys did not object to the prosecution's motions, which raised curiosity about their strategy. Matthew Victor, one of Cochran's attorneys, revealed that this move would provide them with an opportunity to gather more evidence from the federal investigation. Their aim was to prove that Michael was aware of the Ponzi scheme, a revelation that, if true, could significantly impact the state's case. Despite the charge being dropped, Natalie still had several more years to serve in her federal sentence. This fact weighed into the decision to dismiss the charge. The goal was to conduct the necessary tests and gather more evidence while she served her federal sentence. Following the hearing, as she was escorted out of the courtroom by police, Natalie had a brief moment to speak with her family. In a poignant exchange, she expressed her love and bid farewell to her children. The parents of Michael Cochran were also present during the hearing. The latest development in the case of Natalie Cochran happened on October 24, 2023, when Raleigh County prosecuting attorney Ben Hatfield announced that a special grand jury had re-indicted Natalie and charged her with taking Michael's life. After the body was exhumed, a renowned forensic pathologist from Texas confirmed that someone had taken Michael's life, attributing it to the unprescribed exogenous insulin in Michael's system. Due to the special grand jury session being so late in its term, it is expected that Natalie Cochran will go to trial in 2024, where it is expected that she will be found guilty of all the charges against her. In the 1990s, Huntsville, Arkansas was a small, close-knit rural town situated in the Ozark Mountains of northwestern Arkansas. The town's character was deeply rooted in its historical and agricultural traditions, and it was a place where community bonds were strong and life moved at a slower pace compared to larger urban areas. The community life in Huntsville during the 1990s was marked by the strong sense of togetherness. Residents often knew each other well, and the town's social fabric was woven through various community events. Huntsville was a place where locals looked forward to annual fairs, parades, and local festivals. These gatherings not only provided entertainment, but also served as opportunities for people to come together and strengthen their community bonds. It is against this rural backdrop that the tragic case of Sabrina Underwood unfolded. Sabrina Underwood, a 19-year-old at the time, disappeared on January 20th, 1991, after her mother dropped her off at the U.S. Highway 412 and 62 near Bear Creek in Boone County. Sabrina was on her way to Calico Rock to visit her boyfriend, who was incarcerated at the time. Sabrina's mother never saw her again, and Sabrina's disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. Months of anxious waiting followed Sabrina's disappearance. Then, on April 8, 1991, the town was rocked by a grim discovery. A hunter stumbled upon human bones, hair, a pair of panties, and an earring stud near the Gum Springs Cemetery northwest of Little Rock. The remains were identified as those of Sabrina Underwood, her fate far from the destination she had hoped to reach. Sabrina's demise was initially classified as undetermined at the time, marking the beginning of a painstaking and heart-wrenching investigation. Law enforcement officials worked tirelessly, conducting interviews, exploring leads, and attempting to unravel the circumstances surrounding her case. Despite their dedicated efforts, no arrests were made, and the case eventually went cold, casting a shadow of unsolved mystery over Huntsville for years to come. It would take more than 3 decades for the darkness to recede. In July 2022, a pivotal tip emerged, reigniting the investigation. A local attorney with a client incarcerated at an Arkansas state prison possessed a confession letter that was both shocking and chilling. The client, Rick Allen Headley, was already serving a life sentence for the 2018 slaying of his estranged wife, Kirsty Headley. The confession letter contained graphic details of Sabrina Underwood's brutal end, breathing new life into the long-dormant case. Detectives wasted no time in interviewing Rick Allen Headley about the contents of the confession letter. The chilling details he provided would shed light on the brutal crime that had remained shrouded in mystery for more than 30 years. Headley admitted to the crime, and his confession read like a nightmarish scenario that had unfolded in the quiet town of Huntsville. According to the affidavit, Headley's confession painted a grim picture of Sabrina's final hours. He claimed that Sabrina approached him at a gas station and requested a ride. What transpired during that ride would go on to haunt Headley for years to come. In an astonishing turn of events, Sabrina made advances and shockingly demanded money, threatening to accuse Headley of harming her if he did not comply. Headley recounted the moments that would lead to Sabrina's brutal demise in a chilling narrative. After the intimate encounter in his truck, Sabrina informed him that she needed a significant sum of money or she would reveal that he had harmed her. This revelation shocked Headley, and he sensed that there was going to be problems. The events that followed were nothing short of horrifying. Headley decided to drive away, leaving Sabrina behind, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. He believed that he could not let her ruin his life. It was at this point that he launched a violent attack on her outside the truck. In a shocking and gruesome act, he dragged her into a small cemetery, hidden from the prying eyes of any passerby. The description of the slaying itself is nothing short of chilling. Headley confessed to using a Rambo-style knife, complete with a compass at the end, to cut through Sabrina's neck. He described in graphic detail how he used a rock to hammer on the knife blade until it broke the bone and severed her head from her body. His intention, he admitted, was to eliminate any chance that Sabrina could ever reveal what had happened to her. Following this horrifying act, Headley covered Sabrina's body with sticks and leaves to hide it from view. He then gathered her belongings and placed them near her remains. The knife and rock used in the gruesome crime were disposed of several miles away, thrown into a patch of woods. At his apartment in Mountain Home, Headley removed his blood-stained clothes, placed them in a trash bag, and took a shower to cleanse himself of Sabrina's blood. The trash bag containing his clothes was discarded in a dumpster behind a mall, after which Headley left the area. Headley's confession not only sent shockwaves through Huntsville, but also brought a measure of hope and closure to Sabrina's family, who had endured decades of pain and uncertainty. The arrest of Rick Allen Headley marks a long-awaited milestone in the quest for justice in the cold case of Sabrina Lynn Underwood. He now faces charges in connection with Sabrina's case, and his upcoming court appearance in Fulton County Circuit Court in late November 2023 is awaited with bated breath by the community. The case serves as a stark reminder of the enduring dedication of law enforcement and the indomitable spirit of small-town communities who will never give up on finding justice for families like the Underwoods. It was February 1988. Petra Nohl was only 24 years old and a good-looking blonde, recently separated from her husband. She had a 1-year-old toddler and was living with her parents in the town of Cologne, Germany. She had been single for a few months now. She was described as a happy-go-lucky person, a charming young mother. On Saturday night, February 13, 1988, Petra was on her way to the Cologne Carnival. Cologne is a 2,000-year-old city, the oldest in Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. The carnival has been celebrated for centuries, and it is typically the second week of February. It transforms the sober town of Cologne into a party place, with parties everywhere. It is the festival of all festivals. The costumes are not even about a theme or look. They are mostly to keep a person warm and show the spirit of the festival. There is a lot of drinking, a lot of music, and a lot of dancing. The entire week is dedicated to the Crazy Days, which are 7 days of festivities. For Petra, it was time to let her hair down, so to speak. Accompanied by 2 friends, she was out to party all evening at an area known as the Beer Village. The trio spent most of their time at a popular disco called Charivari. The girls were having a great time until Petra got bored. She suggested they attend another party at a different restaurant, but her friends did not want to leave. She did not bring a car, they were her ride. Then around 4 a.m., Petra Nohl borrowed 100 Deutschmarks from a friend and intended to go to another disco by herself. But she would never make it to her destination. On her way there, a life was taken in a brutal fashion. Petra was approximately 600 meters away from the club on Albertostrasse when she was attacked, beaten, and ultimately strangled by an unknown assailant. The incident occurred behind a beer stand, essentially a food truck that had been set up in preparation for the upcoming Carnival Sunday parade. Her lifeless body was hidden under the truck as the preparations for the parade continued. Clad in a jacket and fishnet stockings, the body lay under the potato pancake cart that also served beer, while the procession passed by just a few meters away, till a local resident noticed Petra's body. A 23-year-old woman discovered the body when she was walking with her dog Gossie. It was now Sunday, February 14th, Valentine's Day for many, but a terrible morning for Petra's loved ones. Photos taken at the time show bizarre scenes. Hours after the crime, the participants of the carnival marched past the crime scene in their costumes, while police officers in white overalls secured evidence behind a grill and tape. Spectators were not allowed in the area, recalled Officer Volker Lange, who was the police officer responsible for that section of the route at the time. The motive behind this brutal act remained unknown, but the perpetrator did take off with Petra Nohl's handbag, so it seemed like a mugging gone wrong. While investigators continued, days passed by, and Petra's case was filed away as a cold case. The case was reopened after more than 34 years in cooperation with the Special Organization for Cold Cases Unit of the North Rhine-Westphalia State Criminal Police Office, known as BAO. It was dedicated to solving cold cases with new technology, working arm in arm with the district police authorities. An employee reinvestigated the case and, among other things, suggested a DNA analysis. One of the experts reanalyzed the case and urged a new molecular genetic examination and a public investigation, which subsequently led to a suspect. Petra's case was aired on a German program that can be translated to File Number XY, Unsolved. This program, dedicated to exploring unsolved criminal cases, featured the cold case of Petra Nohl on December 7, 2022. The episode struck a chord with a man. It had been over 3 decades, but he trusted his memory, prompting him to share his long-buried suspicions with the police. The man recalled celebrating the carnival at the Disco Charivari with his friend Norbert K. In Germany, the last names of suspects are kept private to avoid recognition or harassment for the families. He remembered seeing the blonde girl and how Norbert was eyeing her. They had not brought a car that night, so they stepped out, waiting for a cab at a taxi rank about 4 a.m. That is when they saw her again, waiting to get a ride. The 3 of them were unable to find a cab this late, so they started walking their separate ways. He went one way while Petra and his friend Norbert walked in the other direction. The next day, he noticed Norbert had a different hairstyle. That was all fine, except they saw the girl from the taxi stand on the news. Norbert convinced his friend not to go to the police, as their testimony would hold no value. They were both young and did not know much about the law. The whistleblower was in his teens, and Norbert was around 21 years old at the time. They did not go forward with any details of what happened that night. Years passed. The 2 friends went out of touch, but when he saw the episode, the now 54-year-old knew he had to say something. The arrest warrant for Norbert K. was issued by the Cologne District Court. All these years had passed, and Norbert K., now 56 years old, was married with children and well settled. The unemployed construction worker was a loving father with 2 grown children, an adult daughter, and a foster child. Very few neighbors had any complaints about him. When police showed up at his doorstep, it was shocking, but they had probable cause because they had analyzed the DNA found on Petra's body, and Norbert was a match. Surprisingly, Norbert reacted quite calmly to the allegations and claimed he had no knowledge of Petra's case and did not recall her face. He also had a spotless criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. Petra Nohl's daughter, Natalie Nohl, who was only 20 months old when her mother was taken from her, faced him in court. What stuns me is that the man has lived here all these years. I always thought it was someone from outside who came to Cologne just for the carnival." 35-year-old Natalie finally has a face and a name for the man who robbed her of a mother. The defense lawyers Uwe Kretschel and Mark Peel claim that they are convinced of their client's innocence. They doubt that the DNA traces can prove his guilt. The traces were found on the sleeves of the jacket, and since the two were together in a disco, it could have easily happened by dancing. If a transmission of DNA had happened regularly at the disco or at the carnival, then there would be traces of dozens of people on Petra Nohl's clothes. The investigators would then have a pool of DNA samples, and you would never know if the DNA was transferred in the disco or at the scene of the crime. However, Petra did not have any foreign DNA except Norbert K's, and so, with the witness testimony, there is still plenty to charge him with. Since the crime was not related to other forms of assault than physical, it is not unusual that DNA is only found on clothes. The localization of the areas suggests a fighting stance as opposed to dancing in a disco. The trial started on Monday, September 4, 2023, and Norbert chose to plead not guilty. On November 11, 2023, it was revealed at the trial that Norbert's DNA was also found inside of Petra's tights, further incriminating him. The result of the trial has not been made public yet, but Norbert is expected to be found guilty of all the charges against him. On December 2, 1988, in Three Rivers, St. Joseph County, Michigan, 19-year-old Mike Warner left home at 5 a.m. to work at the local market. Almost 10 hours later, at 3:30 p.m., after a long day of work, he headed back home. But when he reached his front porch, he sensed something was wrong. The front door was ajar. He entered the house, and the first thing he heard was the sound of a baby crying. To check on the baby, he started to climb the stairs, but before he could see the baby, he saw a trail of blood on the stairwell railing. Panicked, he raced to the baby's room to find his fiancée's 9-month-old daughter alone but unharmed in her crib with a fresh diaper. Deep down, he knew his fiancée would not leave her baby crying without a reason. He climbed back down the stairs and entered their bedroom on the ground floor. Inside, what he witnessed was a horrifying sight. The room was drenched in blood, staining the floor and the walls. Laying lifeless on the bedroom floor was his 19-year-old fiancée, Cathy Sue Swartz. Terrified that the person who did this might still be there, Mike sprinted to the neighbor's apartment and dialed 911. The first to respond to the gruesome scene were Officer Tom Brinkman and Deputy Sergeant Stark. Officer Brinkman, with 14 years of experience, had never witnessed such a blood-soaked crime scene in his entire career. There was no other word to put it in a nutshell but brutal. Deputy Sergeant Stark wasted no time. He contacted the Michigan State Police Crime Lab in Grand Rapids to request a forensic team to collect vital evidence. Simultaneously, he asked Mike Warner to sign a consent card, granting permission for a thorough search of his home. Mike signed the consent card without hesitation. Officer Tom Brinkman and Deputy Sergeant Stark secured the crime scene. A few minutes later, Deputy Sergeant Stark received a call from Lieutenant Stone from the crime lab, confirming that a team was being assembled and would be on their way soon. A little while later, the state police arrived with their forensic team, officially transferring the case to the Michigan State Police. In the aftermath of the crime lab meticulously scoured the scene, gathering critical evidence. Among the items seized as evidence was a pink GTE telephone found on the waterbed. One fingerprint on the phone was confirmed to be Cathy Swartz's, but a second fingerprint on the phone, stained with a reddish-brown hue, turned out to be human blood. The bloody fingerprint's identity was a mystery, but it was good enough for the FBI database. They ran the print through the AFIS database, but no match was found. The forensic team combed through the house, uncovering a trail of Cathy's blood, which stained every corner of the house. They also stumbled upon the assailant's blood, marked in various spots throughout the scene. To make matters even more disturbing, they found writings made in blood in the house, and also found one on Cathy's leg. The full text and all locations were never disclosed, but one message read, "I was here." Mike Warner recalled the horror. It was smeared all over, walls, everywhere. I mean, it was like painted on. The darkness of the crime seemed to know no bounds. The investigation took a sinister turn as they discovered a bloody footprint of the invader on the bathroom's tiled floor. What struck them as peculiar was that it was December, and their perpetrator was barefoot in such frigid weather. Why would someone remove their shoes in such cold weather? The detectives could only speculate, and the most chilling possibility was that the invader had washed away the blood right there in the victim's bathroom, leaving behind a morbid clue to the horrific events that had transpired. The police reached out to Cathy's neighbors in the residential complex. Remarkably, a few recalled witnessing a man and a woman lingering around her house on that day. Composite sketches were created, but the duo remained unknown, leaving the investigators with more questions than answers. With no signs of forced entry, the detectives concluded that the culprit must be someone Cathy knew. Their suspicion turned toward Mike Warner. Mike was summoned for questioning, and he endured relentless scrutiny from the detectives. Mike was even followed by law enforcement officers in unmarked cars. Their presence became a constant source of pressure. Mike's fingerprints were discovered at the scene, but it was his own home, so it did not indicate that he was involved. In the interrogation room, Mike recounted his whereabouts on that tragic day. He had left the apartment early in the morning around 5 a.m., leaving behind his fiancée, Cathy Sue Swartz, and their daughter. Cathy had stayed home to do her laundry. When he returned in the afternoon, he heard the baby crying and discovered his fiancée's body. Terrified, he believed the culprit might still be in their home and fled to call the police. His alibi was corroborated from his workplace, and eventually he was cleared as the suspect in the case. His relationship with Cathy was harmonious, with no known issues between them. Mike shared how they had decorated a Christmas tree the evening before. Cathy and Mike's love story had recently taken a significant step as they got engaged and planned to marry in 6 months. Mike had already purchased the rings. Cathy was a gentle, kind soul who devoted her days to caring for her daughter at home. She had a unique blend of interests, enjoying tomboyish activities like hunting, fishing, and camping. Her character was without blemish, with no history of drinking or drug use. According to everyone who knew her, she had no known enemies. Mike Warner was not the sole member of the family under the suspicion lens. In fact, their entire circle of close relatives and friends found themselves on the suspect list. Each of them was required to provide fingerprints and footprints. Methodically, one by one, the investigators collected these prints, subjecting everyone to scrutiny and systematically eliminating potential suspects. The medical examiners made a chilling discovery. Cathy bore multiple stab wounds, 3 deep gashes on her throat, and signs of manual strangulation. The cause of her passing was due to loss of blood and asphyxiation. The medical examiner also found defensive wounds with cuts on both hands, proving she fought back bravely. The motive behind this savage attack was clear. An unknown man wanted to assault her. The analysis of blood spatter told a chilling story. The struggle began in the downstairs kitchen, moved to the baby's room upstairs, then it returned downstairs. All led to the bedroom, where Cathy's life met its tragic end. Cathy had fought bravely, but her fate was inescapable. 2 days after finding Cathy's body, detectives got a lead. On December 4th, the police apprehended a suspect, 18-year-old Troy Schultes, who happened to be Cathy's ex-boyfriend. Troy denied any involvement in the crime, insisting that he had been at work that day and later went dancing with his new girlfriend. Multiple witnesses confirmed his alibi, and he even passed a polygraph test. Yet he was not released from custody and remained confined behind bars. On December 8th, they compared the blood from the crime scene with Troy's blood that he gave willingly. The test yielded a big revelation. Troy's blood did not match the blood discovered at the crime scene. A week later, he was released, finally cleared of all suspicions. After his exoneration, Schultes filed a lawsuit for wrongful imprisonment. Detectives exhausted every possible lead. They tested and questioned over 5,000 individuals, but everyone was a no match for the blood they found on the crime scene. The weight of time bore heavily on the police department. Thousands of footprints and fingerprints were meticulously collected, yet not a single match. The FBI chipped in with their experts at the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, where a profile of the likely perpetrator was created. According to FBI profilers, the culprit lived nearby and perhaps even had some connection to the victim. It was an unforgettable and gruesome scene that continued to haunt every police officer on the force. A lot of officers' careers were spent trying to figure it out, but the case went cold and remained so for 35 years. Then, in 2022, this cold case was handed over to Detective Sam Smallcombe. The investigation took a big step forward when Detective Smallcombe decided to employ forensic genetic genealogy to find a lead. In 2022, the culprit's DNA was given to Othram Lab for cutting-edge analysis. With modern technology, the quest for closure was reignited. Othram Lab's DNA analysis led them to a family with 4 sons. One of them was already in the National Criminal Database, but he was not a match. The second and third brothers volunteered that they too were not a match. Just when it seemed like the case had gone cold once more, there was a breakthrough. The DNA analysis of the fourth brother, 53-year-old Robert Odell Waters, was an exact match. On April 30, 2023, Robert Waters' DNA was obtained through a search warrant, which matched the bloody fingerprint on Cathy's pink phone from the crime scene. He was arrested the same day by the Beaufort Police Department. It turned out that Waters was no stranger to Mike Warner. They were childhood friends with a shared history that included countless memories, shared classes, and even Waters spending numerous nights at Mike Warner's house during their school days. Cathy attended a different school, but a month before her tragic end, Mike and Robert Waters ran into each other after a very long time. Mike invited Waters into his home, where he saw Cathy for the first time. The trio spent several hours together, completely unaware of the horror that would soon engulf their lives. The name Robert Odell Waters was already present in the case files. Mike had mentioned Waters as one of their recent house guests before the bloodbath, but Waters was not on the police's radar. According to the FBI profile, the culprit would be someone who lived nearby, and this is what the police were looking for. As per the records, Waters moved to South Carolina in September 1988, 3 months before the crime took place. Waters had a clean criminal record and had relocated to Beaufort County in South Carolina, a considerable distance from the crime scene. The investigators never suspected him. The reason for this oversight became clear. His name appeared once on just one page among the 10,000 pages in the case files. As far as records show, Waters had not committed any known offenses either before or after his attack on Cathy. When Robert Odell Waters was identified as the criminal, he was happily married. He was cherished by his family, regarded as a respected figure within the local community, and had achieved substantial success in life. He resided in a $500,000 home and co-managed a successful plumbing company with his wife. Now he found himself in Beaufort County Detention Center in South Carolina, where he was waiting for extradition to Michigan to face the consequences of his actions. However, less than a week after his incarceration, on the morning of May 6, 2023, something happened at Beaufort County Detention Center. Bradley, an experienced corrections officer with about 18 years of service at various detention centers, had been working at the Beaufort County Detention Center for the past 2 years. On May 5, 2023, her shift began around 11:45 p.m., and she initiated the inmate count at 12:08 a.m. during the shift change. While conducting her rounds, Bradley climbed the stairs, reaching cell A240. When she turned on the light, she discovered inmate Waters with a sheet wrapped around his neck, sitting on the floor, slumped over. She promptly alerted other BCDC personnel, declaring a code blue for a medical emergency. Together with CO Larry Shaw, Bradley entered cell A240 and removed the sheet from around Waters' neck, laying him flat on his back. They initiated CPR until the nursing staff arrived. Bradley and Shaw were then instructed to leave the cell. According to CO Shaw, the last time Waters had been checked on was at approximately 11:24 p.m. during a security watch. When Bradley discovered Waters during her count, his face had turned red and he felt cold to the touch. Mike Warner said that he believes Waters took an easy way out. Mike suffered deeply from the loss. He frequently visited Cathy's grave, bringing roses, her favorite flowers. Mike never married, grappled with alcoholism, struggled to maintain steady employment, and at 53 still lives with his mother. It was his sister who told him they found the man responsible. "I woke him up and I told him," his sister said. "He just looked at me like dumbfounded. He could not believe it." Cathy's parents, Audrey and David, gained custody of their granddaughter, Courtney, following their daughter's tragic demise. Now, Courtney is 35 years old and a mother of 4. In 2012, Audrey passed away without ever discovering the identity of the assailant, and in 2022, David also departed, carrying his unanswered questions with him to the grave. Waters' demise emerges as an unspoken admission of guilt, a chilling echo of his dark secret. He had lived with the knowledge of his crime, and the weight of it must have become unbearable. For his wife and family, he was the provider, the father, the husband they had known all their lives. Suddenly, he was gone, and with him, the facade of normalcy shattered. The burden of snuffing out a life proved too heavy to bear, and in an attempt to spare his loved ones the shame and humiliation, he chose the easy way out. 27-year-old Firozeh Deghanpour was an Iranian exchange student at the University of Nebraska in Omaha. She was a brilliant math student, admired by her peers and her family in Iran. In fact, it was her math skills that got her so far in life. Firozeh's friends were in awe of her math skill set and described her as a person with a grand presence. She would entertain her guests with Persian delights and serve Persian tea. Firozeh had an important appearance, and it was clear that this girl was destined for great things in life. She was set to graduate with an engineering degree with a double major from the university. Firozeh lived with a Jordanian girl sharing an apartment on 517 North 88th Plaza. The roommate last spoke to Firozeh on August 13, 1983. Firozeh had called her while working in the computer center. She did not have a plan on how she would get home from the center, since she did not have a ride back. Firozeh's roommate was not worried, as Firozeh said that she will call back later. But by 11:45 p.m., Firozeh had not called back. It had been raining earlier, so her roommate got a bit worried and set out to look for her. There were not cell phones back then, so she could not just simply call her. Shortly after midnight, she went to the University Computer Center but did not find Firozeh there. According to another friend, Parand Kia, perhaps Firozeh had sought a metro train or intended to hitchhike. But those who knew her well knew Firozeh would never hitchhike. It was just not like her. Another friend had seen Firozeh around 6:30 p.m. that night when he drove her to the computer center. She had told him to pick her up when she was free, but since he was unable to return after midnight, Firozeh assured him she would find a way home. Her friends grew increasingly concerned when she did not return by 3 a.m., but they went to sleep. Finally, by 8 a.m., there was still no sign of Firozeh, and they knew something had gone horribly wrong. A missing persons report was officially filed on the morning of August 14, 1983, by another acquaintance, Abu Hassan, who lived nearby. A few hours later, fishermen were walking along a gravel road called the River Road when they came across something unusual and horrifying. They discovered Firozeh's undressed body disposed of under a bridge over Pigeon Creek, north of Council Bluffs, Iowa. She appeared to have been severely beaten. Her personal belongings and papers were found with her body, suggesting she may have lost her life at the hands of someone she knew. Had she been kidnapped or grabbed randomly, she would have probably dropped some of her things. There was evidence that suggested she had lost her life elsewhere and was brought to the bridge. According to the chief deputy at the time, Sheriff Steve Troga, an autopsy revealed that she lost too much blood from several cuts to her throat and had suffered 4 abdominal stab wounds. She had been physically and intimately assaulted. Officers recovered blood and hair found on the bridge railing where Firozeh was found. The blood and hair found at the crime scene were tested, and while some of the blood did not belong to Firozeh, the hair was hers. Interestingly, the blood type was different on the items, type O and type A. Type O matched Firozeh, but type A did not render a match. It was another person's blood. But that was all you could determine in the 80s. Investigators initially interviewed her acquaintances and took fingerprints and hair samples from over 100 UNO students in the month following the slaying, but these efforts brought about no results. It was determined that Firozeh had last been seen around 9:30 p.m. when she left the UNO campus, but nobody saw anything suspicious. Firozeh's roommate informed Firozeh's family in England about her tragic passing, who subsequently informed her parents who were in Tehran, Iran. At the time, there was political unrest in Iran. The Shah of Iran had been recently exiled, and Ayatollah Khomeini had taken to run the country. There were protests, problems, and reforms. The director of International Student Services at UNO, Ms. Kia, revealed that Firozeh was a member of a leftist Iranian political group called Fashion, but was not known to be extremely politically active. Additionally, Ms. Kia remarked that Firozeh was a quiet, sober individual, well-liked by her peers. Nobody had any motive to harm her. She was not the sort of girl to wander off with strangers or take any illegal substances. Many people believed Firozeh's incident had a political agenda behind it. However, at least one official denied the possibility. Ultimately, her case drew the attention of the FBI, with Herb Hawkins Jr. serving as the agent in charge for Nebraska and Iowa. They initiated an investigation to determine if a federal kidnapping statute had been breached. A pivotal element of their inquiry revolved around the location of the slaying and the uncertainty of Firozeh's state when she crossed from Nebraska into Iowa. Basically, was she alive when she crossed the state line? The investigation into Firozeh's demise spanned several months in 1983 and involved collaboration with multiple law enforcement agencies. However, despite their dedicated efforts, the case eventually went cold. Decades passed as Firozeh's case was shelved away. The real breakthrough came when, decades later, Sergeant Jim Doty of the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office was contacted by UNO graduate Stephen Martin. Martin traveled around the world for his career, but he never stopped thinking about Firozeh. In fact, in November of 2020, he remembered an individual who had been cleared of any charge in her case thanks to a dependable alibi. He contacted Sergeant Doty. While the suspect was still in the clear, Sergeant Doty realized that items could be re-examined. He insisted Firozeh's case be reopened in light of recent advances in forensics. Sergeant Doty conducted a DNA analysis on the evidence gathered years and years ago, on items including her undergarments, the left-hand glove, computer papers, and a beer can. In March 2021, the test results shed new light on the case. The glove had bloodstains, with Firozeh's DNA profile, as well as a new person's genetic material. The computer papers near her body had 4 fingerprints. 2 of them were identified. One belonged to Firozeh, the other to a computer consultant at UNO. Surprisingly, there was a match on the combined DNA index system, CODIS, database. The match? A seasoned felon called Bud Leroy Christensen. Christensen was on an offenders list. He had a history of serious offenses, with at least 3 convictions that found him guilty of having assaulted a minor in 1972. 2 offenses were similar in nature involving adults, and they were more recent in 2014. He was also charged with possession of a firearm by a felon in 1999. In the most recent assault case, Christensen pled guilty to attempted second-degree assault and first-degree false imprisonment. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Listed as a permanent offender, the streets were safe from Christensen until his release in May of 2018. Sergeant Doty informed Stephen Martin of the news. Martin had moved to Nevada after graduation, where the 62-year-old lives to this day. The fact that the decades-old mystery was finally going to be solved was incredible. Sergeant Doty spoke to Firozeh's brother for over an hour. Her brother was in London when he got the news of the DNA match. The family finally had answers. Her brother was so stunned he was unable to speak or process the information. It was time for some closure after 37 years. Christensen was arrested in Omaha on April 30, 2021, and held on a $1 million bond. He waived his right to resist extradition to Iowa, where his trial was going to take place. 67-year-old Christensen was held in the Douglas County Jail, awaiting transport to Pottawatomie County on a first-degree charge of taking an innocent life. He confessed to his crimes. At the time of Firozeh's heartless slaying, he would have been 30 years old. On April 6, 2023, Bud Leroy Christensen was sentenced to 50 years in prison for taking Firozeh's life. Stephen Martin and some of Firozeh's old friends are petitioning for a posthumous degree for Firozeh, 38 years after her slaying, to honor her memory and accomplishments. She is said to have been one of the brightest minds of UNO. Thanks to the officers and friends who never gave up, they were able to put a monster behind bars. Born in 1983, Megan McDonald was only 7 months old when her parents moved to Middletown, New York. She had a sister named Karen and 2 younger brothers. From Little League games to movies, Karen and Megan were best friends. Megan would often rescue strays and be incredibly compassionate, even with grown-ups. In college, Karen met the love of her life, James Whalen. When James was nervous about meeting Karen's family for the first time, 16-year-old Megan put him at ease immediately, incredibly warm and welcoming, so he would feel like a member of the family. Megan had a creative imagination. She named their cat Pumpkin James Whalen to include him in the family too. Megan graduated from Burke Catholic High School with the class of the year 2000. Then she went on to attend SUNY Orange in Middletown. It is a community college, and Megan was happy to be close to home. Megan loved children and considered working in a field where she would be in contact with them. In 2002, Megan's family suffered a devastating blow when she lost her father, Dennis McDonald. At only 47 years old, Officer McDonald was a retired detective from the New York Police Department and unexpectedly passed away due to a heart attack. But they never stopped being a family and still got together for Christmas in 2002, not knowing it would be the last Christmas Megan would spend with the family. A family video shows Megan opening a box of sweaters and gushing over it, sticking the bow on her head, revealing just how warm and gracious she was. Around the same time was when Megan got her first job. It was the first step in getting her life back together after the loss of her father. Karen recalled the first time Megan got her coffee with her own money. She was incredibly proud of herself for having earned money from her first job. Megan realized she could make it. A year after her father's passing, Megan decided it was time to make a big step forward in her life. In March 2003, Megan signed a lease for an apartment near Middletown, a small town of Wallkill, New York. Megan looked forward to starting her life as an adult, completely independent, but that would be sadly short-lived. Megan worked at the American Cafe in Galleria Mall and was waiting tables from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on March 13, 2003. After that, she walked to a Closeby Bank's ATM to withdraw cash at exactly 3:10 p.m. She was later spotted in Greenway Terrace in Wallkill, New York. Two acquaintances were throwing a birthday party, and they invited her in, but Megan refused. They went back inside and told everyone that Megan had plans with some other friends in Middletown. Next, Megan was at a friend's house from 7:30 p.m. to 12 a.m., watching the TV show Friends. Then Megan headed home, telling her friend she had to get some sleep or she would be late for work the next day. Little did the friend know it would be the last time she would see Megan alive. Instead of going straight home, Megan stopped at the birthday party in the Greenway Terrace area in Wallkill. Two friends who were leaving the party spotted her in her car. They exchanged a few words, and Megan told them she was waiting to meet someone. It was 12:30 a.m., just after midnight, the last time anyone saw Megan McDonald alive. Megan did not show up for her afternoon shift at the American Cafe later in the day. They left voicemails on her phone. Her friends and family realized she was not in touch or taking any calls, not responding to any text messages. Her mother asked Karen to check on her as she was not answering. At first, Karen and James Whalen were a little annoyed at Megan being so irresponsible. However, as the day progressed, they grew increasingly worried. They lived 2 hours from where Megan was last seen, and they could not trace her. Daylight burnt into night, and then the next day, they were met with terrible news. The next morning, a man and his nephew came across something shocking. The owners of 229 Bowser Road in the town of Wallkill saw something lying at an odd angle. To their horror, they realized it was a body, the body of a young woman, and they called 911, reaching the state police. New York State Police were able to identify the body through the driver's license and ID'd her as Megan McDonald, the missing 20-year-old. An autopsy revealed she had been struck with a blunt object, which proved to be fatal. Detective Brad Natalizio detailed that the area adjacent to Bowser Road was a slender dirt trail that ended in a cul-de-sac, nestled within an isolated field. The area was isolated, and the detective deduced that she would have known the person who led her there, as it would be dangerous to drive all alone out so far at night. Someone was with Megan as she drove there, someone she trusted, and then the person took her life. State police found out that Megan owned a 1991 Mercury Sable, but it was not at the scene of the crime, so a search ensued to recover her car. Local police were able to get media coverage to help solve Megan's mystery. Some days later, police received a tip that the car was parked at the Kensington Manor apartment complex. The investigation revealed that the car had been parked there since early morning around 8 on March 14th, so it had been there for some time. It was evident that the driver left in a hurry. Investigators got a lot of evidence and lifted many things that would help get a proper DNA analysis. Over 700 items were bagged and kept in storage. Officers deduced that someone was sitting in the driver's seat of Megan's car and had struck her with a fatal blow. Frustratingly, after no further leads, Megan's case unfortunately went cold for quite a while. Detectives Brad Natalizio and Michael Carletta grew up in the area and knew about the missing woman. Megan's case was the biggest local mystery for a long time. 20 years later, on the 20th anniversary of Megan's unfortunate demise, her case was featured on a popular TV show called Dateline. Her case was highlighted and subsequently efforts were doubled. In 2018, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit took on the case, aiming to profile the suspect and devise a theory. After going through the crime scene and autopsy photos along with exhaustive case files containing over 800 leads and interviews, Their theory aligned with the conclusions reached at Troop F Barracks on Crystal Run Road in the town of Wallkill. They determined that the perpetrator exhibited all the hallmarks of narcissistic personality disorder, as defined by the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, a constant need for admiration, and a lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. Detective Natalizio and Carletta were assigned to the case in 2017, and since they were aware of the local stories they had heard growing up, they had a lot of insight. Natalizio never stopped working on Megan's case, even when he switched jobs, so her case went across departments and the community. Natalizio was Megan's age and grew up in Orange County. When he began working for the NYPD in 2006, his wife urged him to solve Megan's case if he ever got promoted. The detective's wife was a registered nurse who worked alongside Megan's mother, so there was a personal connection. The officers began with re-interviewing all witnesses and suspects. They went back to Kensington Manor Apartments and found some interesting information. Around 12:30 a.m., the night Megan lost her life, a witness spotted her car. Megan's car was white with a black stripe on the side, so it was something you would notice, but that is not what caught the witness's attention. There was loud music blaring from the system in the car, so loud that she had to look outside and check. There was another car trailing Megan's vehicle, a dark Honda Civic hatchback. The complex has a big loop, so both of the cars circled back, the music still loud. It provided a timeline. Megan was alive at 12:30 a.m., which means the crime occurred sometime between 12:30 a.m. and 8 a.m. The main theory was that two people followed Megan in the car, somehow got into her back seat, and took her to Bowser Road, where her body was recovered. The assailant was in the back seat, and they had a friend in the passenger seat while Megan drove. Whoever this person was, they had some control over Megan, possibly psychologically. They drove to a secluded field off Bowser Road, a place where teenagers and young people would hang out to drink. The entrance was so tricky that a person would normally miss it, but the assailant knew exactly where he was taking them, and possibly knew that any confrontation would not be heard because the area was isolated. It was so quiet that one could hear a far-off train engine simply standing on the spot. Megan possibly got into an argument with this person, which resulted in the perpetrator flying into a rage, hitting her repeatedly with a blunt object. The passenger sitting beside Megan was possibly in shock, but whatever it was, the assailant managed to convince them not to go to the police. After disposing of her body, the two individuals brought her car back and parked it, thereafter running off. Investigators analyzed all the objects lifted from Megan's car, and a private lab called Cybergenetics was tasked with re-examining the DNA in 2023 to put to test the advances in forensic technology. A company by the name of Lamar Advertising has been providing free exposure for Megan for many years. They funded 7 billboards for Megan along State Route 17 in Orange and Sullivan counties, as well as on Interstate 84 in Orange County. They urged people with any information to come forward. The NYP Detective Union offered $10,000 for any information regarding Megan, and the FBI also offered $10,000, amounting to a total of $20,000. Surprisingly, before DNA could bring about something conclusive, the Honda Civic with a loud system was identified. They marked it down to 2 suspects, one of whom was Megan's ex-boyfriend, Edward Hawley. Suspect number 2 has never been publicly identified. It was revealed that he passed away in 2010. He left a voicemail on Megan's phone on March 9, 2003 at 1:24 a.m., with loud music in the background. Investigators discovered that Megan had $21.92 in her account at the time after she deposited $1,158.33 into her HSBC account. Then, on March 10th, she overdrafted it by $869.92. In 3 of Holly's interviews, he admitted that he owed her $300 because she helped him buy a purple 1990 Honda Civic hatchback. Yes, the very car they had been looking for. On the day that the crime took place, Megan had an altercation with Edward Holly, which he admitted in all of his police interviews. Megan's landlord came forward to give additional information. On March 13, 2003, around 9 a.m., Megan's landlord saw a man in her apartment on Karen Drive. The man was her new boyfriend, whose name has been withheld in documents. An hour later, she dropped him off at his house on Sheffield Drive in Wallkill and headed to work. Interestingly, the reason Megan did not go to the party on Greenway Terrace was because Edward Holly was at the party. Through witness accounts and police records, it was deduced that Megan tried to buy marijuana from various sources. She called someone at 10:57 p.m., then contacted the person again at 11:25, but he could not get any for her. Again, at 12:05 a.m., a witness spotted her at the ATK gas station on 152 Wisner Avenue in the city of Middletown, where she was asking the clerk for a Dutch, which is slang for a marijuana cigarette. That witness also saw her car outside but did not see anyone in it. Suspect number 2 was contacted by Megan several times during the night, the last call at 12:25 a.m., when she went to pick him up at his house on Cindy Lane in Wallkill. He was sitting in the passenger seat and told her he did not have any marijuana. She finally said she would get some from Edward Holly. Witnesses saw Holly leave the party just before midnight on March 13th. Just after midnight, that would be March 14th, Holly and Megan's phones pinged off the towers in the Scotchtown area in the town of Wallkill, which was the time frame officers had for Megan picking up her assailant. Holly admitted he knew Megan was outside the party, but that he went straight home to 66 Sandburg Court in the town of Wallkill. However, the cell phone tower and witnesses placed him in the vicinity of the crime scene. Holly had a history of domestic violence, and he had ample motive to hurt Megan since he owed her a lot of money. The FBI helped put the final pieces of this intricate puzzle together, thanks to their behavioral analysis unit. It was possible that Holly had a disagreement with Megan. Known for being opinionated, her sister Karen admits this theory held ground for them. It was indeed possible that Megan had a disagreement with her ex, and he struck her in a moment of rage. Megan's last outgoing call at 12:30 a.m. was to Holly, which he claims was simply to get marijuana. However, this makes Holly the last person to see her alive, and given his history, locations, and the fact that he never came clean about being with her in the time frame of her demise, he is definitely a prime suspect. On April 20th, 2023, the New York State Police arrested Edward Holly and charged him with taking Megan's life in the second degree. Holly was involved in a car crash in 2007, after which he lost use of his legs. He was already in jail for violating probation while involved in a narcotics case in October of 2021. Now 42 years old, Holly would have been 22 when he took Megan's life. As officers wheeled him away, clad in an orange jumpsuit, he screamed at the cameras that he was innocent and that he loved Meghan. His two daughters rushed to his side in an attempt to show support, while the McDonalds shouted, "Justice for Meghan." The second suspect in the case allegedly took his own life and has still not been named by the police. Unfortunately, Holly was released without bail because the prosecutors made a small mistake. They failed to present the case to a grand jury in time. However, Edward Holly had to appear in court in June and August. His next court date will be after Thanksgiving. When convicted, he faces 25 years to life in prison. Meghan's family sought comfort in the fact that the man who mercilessly slayed her has finally been identified, while Karen says her little sister will never get to see the series finale of her favorite show, Friends. The family is grateful for the opportunity to give her a proper goodbye. As in many such cases, the body is not recovered as quickly.